camera so you all can see me. So welcome. We're going to get started with today's webinar presentation, which is the Futures Project Session 4, How Part 2, featuring Kim Telly, who is going to be our presenter today. So a little bit about our project. Basically, the purpose of the learning community is to help you all do what you're doing already, just better. But it's really to highlight innovative and effective practice models from across the country and report those findings out to you all. And here's the team. Of course, there is myself, but we also have Tiffany Marley, who is the project director, Jarl Crocker, who is the director of the Training and Technical Assistance Department, Courtney Kohler, she is our senior associate for the TNTA department, and Liza Torres, who is our program associate for the TNTA department. And last but certainly not least, we have Charity Frankowski, and she's actually our AmeriCorps Vista volunteer who is working with us on our Rural Impact Project. We do these webinars, and also the learning community in general is of critical importance to the work of our network because it helps you all increase your capacity to fight poverty more effectively. And this is important because anti-poverty work is at the heart of what we do here in Community Action. And we're going to continue our little practice that we do at the beginning of all of our webinar events, and that is to recite the promise of community action. We do this because it grounds us in our work and it reminds us why we're here. And it states that community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. So a little bit about the National Webinar Series in particular, but again, this is just another medium for us to broadcast and report out to you all the different anti-poverty approaches and strategies that we are finding and learning about that are impactful across the network. So a little bit about today's presentation. As I'm sure you know, many of you are probably repeat attendees to some of the previous events in this series, but we're really talking about theory of change. We know that the National Community Action Network theory of change that we have here on the screen guides us in our work. But what we're going to be talking about with today's event is really focusing in and drilling down to that local level, what it looks like to build and then act on a theory of change on the local level, and that's what the Futures Project is all about. They're actually working up in the Northwest with I think it's about 4 states up there working with community action agencies and working on the theory of change that they have researched, developed, and implemented. And now they're going to talk a little bit about some of the results that they're seeing from their work. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over into the capable hands of today's presenter, Kim Telly from Solid Ground. So Kim, you are on, and welcome. Go ahead and get started.
All right, well, thank you, and hello, everyone. Welcome to the Futures Project, the last of 4 conversations that we've had where we're working to share the project that we've been doing, and I'm going to go ahead and just go through and talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. For those of you who have not been on a previous webinar, we're going to go through some of the backstory of the Futures Project, how it came to be, who were the participants in it, some of the elements that it's taken to put it in place, and then also we're going to talk about how we tried to go through and make sure we were consciously determining how to implement, go from a thought process to an implementation process, and so we went through a pilot series. And I'll go through a couple of examples of the different action agencies' results and their experience. Then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the elements of developing the learning community approach to the work, and then we're going to talk about how you could work at putting Futures into play in your agency or in your community. So a little bit of how we got started. So why did we even produce this project? Well, the state of Washington was going through, we have 30 CAP agencies within our state, and we were struggling with trying to describe what we do. That sort of classic, what's your elevator speech? And many of us, as we know, do so many things in the community that putting that together into a quick way to let people understand actually what we do was difficult. And because of that, we were trying to figure out how to be more succinct, how to bring value to the people we're talking to in regards to what we do. And we have lots of different types of audiences, and so including ourselves and the clients we serve. So we were trying to come together with something that would create more of a unified conversation, but also, I think, change the way we talk about ourselves. And one of the things we started to look at was the development of our own theory of change. And the state of Washington has, historically, our CAP programs have done well to sort of talk about things from an outputs perspective. We serve X number of people, we provide X number of boxes of food or rides in our transportation department or housing units or that type of approach. And we wanted to back up and go to a different conversation about why we do what we do and change the way we talk about the things that we provide as really outcomes or community improvement. And so we had to sit down and go through some core conversations, and those conversations were kind of difficult. But at the end, we came up with some statements around what we believe, where we believe our basis we come from, and to sort of redefine the way we, again, talk about what we do and who we are. And that came, it took about a year, and we came up with a theory of change for the state of Washington, and we have later, this went through an adoption process for the region itself, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, in regards to identifying the way we look at what we primarily do and what we feel that we primarily do, which is to stabilize people and perform those services and supports that are around helping them through crisis. And reaching some stability, and then also trying to work to equip people to exit poverty. We used to talk about how we want to eliminate poverty, and like sort of ending homelessness, it's something that is very difficult to measure, and often something that feels like it's something that's not attainable. But if we talk about it from a standpoint of the basics of what we're attempting to support our community with, is usually in those areas of stabilizing people so that they themselves, with supports, can equip themselves to exit poverty. And so we came to it from that approach, also recognizing that in order to have healthy individuals and families, we have to have a healthy community. And what does that look like, too? And so you see that we have divided, actually, our theory of change into those two pieces, so that we recognize that each of them are of value, and we actually put the community change and the community indicators, which we'll, eventually we'll talk about in a few minutes, as the foundation and the core of what we do that will then help all of us to be able to be stable and to be in a more thriving circumstance. Let me change. So one thing that we did in Washington State is that there was a desire to bring this work to a broader audience. And so we went through a process with, I said, the Oregon and Idaho, and had a conversation in regards to coming together and feeling like we could both share the work of creating these theories of change and going through the process of implementing it across, but also that while it might slow the progress of it, from Washington's perspective maybe, it was well worth the shared vision and ownership and broadening our base of conversation so that we can create a more compelling and unified way we talk at a regional level, not just within a state. So we went through a process, and I think in the last webinar we talked quite a bit around some of the tools. We have a toolkit that is being designed for this, and some of these tools are already available and uploaded on the WASCAP website and will be on the National Learning Community site as well. But we went through a process of coming together and creating a steering committee to work together we had a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, around how we were going to partner. We all adopted the theory of change model. And then we began to go through the process of determining how would we continue the work into the operational level. And so we went through, and in this process, including the piloting process, we had some definite lessons learned and some ways in which we are continuing to constantly go through a continuous process improvement on the way the Futures Project works. And also that we are creating a learning community ourselves and sharing, of course, that with the National Learning Community objectives. So one of the ways that we have gone through this collective sort of process on a theoretical level, we realized that we needed to go through and test some of the foundations of our thinking by asking agencies within the 3 states to pilot and go through a learning process to spend more time talking about learning communities, talking about the information we collect, and as all of us put it in the context of the things that we are required to implement within our agencies regarding ROMA and continuous process improvement and our new MPI structure and collections of data. So within that confines, we put together a learning curriculum and piloted that process, including 6 CAP agencies, of which one of them was my agency, Solid Ground in Seattle. The others were 2 within each of the states because we wanted to make sure we were representing both all of the regional area, but also rural and urban service areas specifically, so that we can see whether the premises that we have put together hold when it comes to looking at the theory of the work. So we went through a process, and this is sort of an outline of the curriculum and the experience. We met together in Portland, Oregon, and came together and started to talk about our individual agencies and where we felt like they were in the process of maybe adopting a collective approach to information and data. And we went through a learning curriculum that was designed by a vendor called Global Learning Partners, which is a national, as you can imagine, a global organization, and they focus on adult learning and ways in which adults process information and how that's different academically than other types of training, and how adults need to be able to have on-the-job training or experience. It has to be something that relates to what they do every day in order for it to take hold. And so we went through this curriculum that was designed, and each week we logged on as a team and went through the process of talking not only amongst ourselves within our organization, but the other members that were in the other sites around information, challenges we were having, who we were inviting to the table, why, and different kinds of aspects that the curriculum prompts us to go through in order to try to refine how we might approach information and who we share it with within our agency. So we chose, and the other aspect of this is as we were talking just a minute about the new MPI structure and the fact that, all of us as of, next week will be being asked to collect information slightly differently, and in some cases collect new pieces of information and start reporting on those. And many of us have been going through that conversation, the mechanics of how that affects us and to what degree that benefits us as far as the information it provides us, as well as how we're going to maybe implement those new collection of information in our organization. So the pilot's focus and its intent was to concentrate on this particular factor. How do we convert data into what it takes to make decisions and to make strategy out of the information that we have. And ROMA, as a best practice model, has always asked us to do that quality assurance, to go through the process of looking at the services we provide, looking at the quote-unquote data, making decisions around whether it's telling us something that we might then make adjustments to the way we do what we do, and then we try it again. And it's sort of a cyclical process. But ROMA doesn't specifically say how. And I know for my agency, we were struggling with the how. And we were struggling to have a process that was thought through, had some intentional design, so that we were consistently doing it across programs and with staff, and then coming up at the end with, well, how do we decide? Who decides? And so we were struggling with just the mechanics, I think, of the function of ROMA. So this was something that was positive, at least for my organization, to want to participate in. So Futures, Futures is in and of itself a set of approaches and processes that help us look at information and then include the right people and then go through a process of meeting some of the, we call them national performance indicators, but performance outcomes or outcome measurements that both funders are looking towards us to provide, but also should be based upon and supported by any agency's community needs assessment that says we've gone out, we've talked to the community, we've done a scan of what's going on, who provides what we provide, and then go through a process of reporting that through, hopefully to be impacting a particular factor sometimes, whether that's housing, affordable housing, or it's food insecurity, or it's thriving for children. So the Futures work and the 13 dimensions of poverty that came out of the research the Oregon State University provided the 13 dimensions are in alignment with 19 of the national performance indicators specifically. For instance, I think they're identical for housing, employment, income, mobility. So the Futures pilot project also focused primarily on helping the sites that were participating to look at those factors that are in and of themselves close or identical to the national performance indicators, but to look at them in a different way, which is about the approach that's taken. And that was around creating and supporting a learning community. And part of it was talking about the fact that the data, the term data is usually around quantitative data, like how many of these did we do and how many people did we serve, and or what is the cost per participant. But we know in the work that we do, so many other factors come into play around our actual story, the whole actual impact that we might be providing, or the niche of support that we might be creating. And so we know also that when we talk about those things together, whether it's the data person or it's the case manager or it's the communications person for your organization or it's donors, or that all of us have a lens to which we see the issue from or the service from, and that those are as important. And that putting them all in the same room, theoretically, and then talking about them is where, if you look in these middle spaces where we explain things to each other and we educate or enlighten each other on facts or on the perspectives of clients, or the clients themselves talk about their perspectives, and we engage each other, that we end up being able to get a richer and a higher dose of information overall, to then use it all together to make change or to help foster change in the community if we feel like that's what it's saying needs to happen. And so I brought those 13 dimensions of poverty up, and that's one of the areas where in our support of our theory of change, you might, if you remember the above, we call them the bubbles, there's 12 bubbles that look, that go, let me see if I can just go back. It's important enough to go back. Unfortunately, I should have put them closer together. There we go. So these 12 bubbles or bullets that you see are actually the 13 dimensions of poverty. And so there's 13 in which physical health and mental health, which is in that second column there, are actually broken out in the research, because as we know, they're very different needs and they have different aspects to them. But for the purposes of looking at our theory of change, they're in symmetry, which was important to some. We put physical and mental health together, but other than that, you can see that the 13 dimensions we're talking about, we framed our theory of change on them from stability services towards those services to equip people with poverty up there on the top. And so I can show you that connection. Let me see if I can get my slides to go back. I don't know. Trying to get. I'm trying to get, there we go. There we go. Now they're going to go back for me. Thank you, technology world. So Oregon State went through this process in partnership with the state of Oregon, and the Futures based its work on it, and they went through the process of doing an extensive research study that tied together the 13 dimensions support also the national social determinants of health, and came together with this model that we were looking for as a type of foundation or a platform that we as a region could talk from, that we could all start using the same verbiage or the same ways in which we're looking at what we do, so we can have that as a way to eventually try to have measurement and comparable information just between us, which we have in Washington State 30 community action agencies, but there's 53 total community action agencies in Region 10, and I'm just talking about that as Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, who began the original Futures pilot. The state of Alaska is now engaged, and so we're happy about that as well. So we looked at this and adopted it, as I said. And as you might imagine, many of them we know. We know that these are the areas that we do most of our work. These are the areas where we see needs over and over again in our community around people having these challenges affecting their ability to exit poverty, especially generational poverty, and that these returned over and over again in the research as the areas of services beyond just the Housing First model or rapid rehousing or what we call opportunity. And so for me, I know when we looked at my agency, for instance, we do services in many of these categories. And in the pilot process, we were asked to go through and select 4 of these elements and look at the data that we collect currently together, and then whether we would deepen the way we try to capture information in those areas in order to report to a greater degree what we do. And so my organization went through the process of choosing those and then, going through and looking at the data we collect, what NPIs, for instance, we currently collect information on, and whether those are actually indicating for us the outcomes that we were trying to achieve and the outcomes that this research had said were critical to actually impacting that dimension in that person's life. And so I wanted to give just a sort of a couple examples that hopefully can tie this together for people. I was just talking about, I represent Solid Ground. I went through the pilot process. I'm the Strategic Information Systems Manager for Solid Ground, and I am in charge of compliance and reporting for most of our programs when it comes to hitting targets and working with the programs and providing information, and sometimes also the qualitative side of it, of individual stories, et cetera. And so one of the areas that Solid Ground decided to look at was we have housing and a domestic violence shelter and several other ways in which we support housing low-income people and homeless, support of our county's homeless serving system. And so we have long used a tool that would probably fall under a self-sufficiency matrix or a self-sufficiency type tool where we assess people along similar types of categories and looking at whether they have challenge or they are in a thriving to in that particular category, but they have crisis in other areas, and we go through that process. And that tool has been used by, the people within usually what we would call sort of first responders, people in our emergency shelter, people who are receiving their first intakes and supports through our transitional housing programs, our overnight family shelter, or are in our permanent supportive housing, many of those with disabilities, and our veterans reintegration program. So we use that tool in various ways, but it also has been mostly based on assessment of status, and the individual case plans that are made with those individuals often were also output oriented. Did you find housing? Did you take advantage of the food bank access? Did you, et cetera, do these things? We wanted to have a conversation around, is that really working? Is that really telling the whole story? And how does the client feel about being assessed in that manner? And so we went and in the Futures process, it asks you to say, well, who should be at the table for this conversation? And how do we ensure that they can be at that table and come to the conversation, and how will they feel safe in that environment to be able to give their input and feel that it's valued and that it's respected mutually? How do we go through this process? And so we sat down and we talked about it, and we accessed direct service staff, the supervisors of that staff, managers, the director, client representation, and we went through a dialogue around what would this tool look like if it was more strength-based, for instance, or when we look at the dimensions of poverty. I'll give you an example. In mobility, it asks one very specific question, which is, do the people in your community get where they need and have the access to the resources in order to improve their lives, or to have social connection, or to have a sense of belonging in the community? And when you ask that question, many people will say, what is it that the information is that you capture around your transportation service? And when I talked to the director, she would say, well, we actually track more, you know, the number of rides we give and who we give those rides to and where they go. And we assume where they go is the type of service that they're receiving. And I also have all these other factors like on-time arrival and how many accidents and whether my drivers are having overtime and meeting the requirements of being on the road, and et cetera. And so we were looking at it saying, wow, we do a lot of capture of outcomes, but can we answer this question? Are we getting people to where they need to go in order to? And so the dialogue that we had together at that greater degree with larger perspective of people at the table, we started to realize we weren't really asking the questions that would give us those results. And we also said that we probably need to change the way we are asking questions because we want it to be more relationship-based and not so transactional sounding. And so we went through a process of changing it together. And in the end, we ended up with a tool in which we had added the 13 dimensions, but also kept many of the required by our funder, HUD, and others questions, but we also tried to still make those questions a little more supportive of the relationship we were wanting to have with clients. And the tool that we created there is actually going to be included in the toolkit that I'll talk about a little bit more and show you how to get to in a while. And then another example was our Lewiston CAP went through a process in which they similarly looked at a program. In this case, they looked at their nutrition and foods program, and they were looking at what they measured, what was it that they actually were tracking, and why they were tracking it, who was asking them for that information. And then they started to look at it from a different perspective and answer the question specifically that was, are we actually impacting and affecting food insecurity in our community? And that's a different question than did we provide X number of food resources to people. And what they were finding is that they couldn't answer that question with the information they were gathering. And so they also went through a process where they included line staff, or what I would call people directly talking and communicating and working with the client every day, and those that supervise them, and the managers of this program as well as other programs, and talk through the process of how would we be answering this question, whether we're impacting overall food insecurity in our community. And what they determined was that if they looked at it from that approach, that they really needed to identify very different data collection points in order to try to answer that question. And they also, in the conversation just through this process of the pilot, they really identified they needed to change the way they examined multiple programs. And so they're only in the beginning, but they had gone through this process. And both of those are just examples of the way that we're trying to continue to put into the way we do work the difference between those outputs and outcomes. That's just two examples. See if I can get my slide to go. There we go. So a lot of this was both looking at what we're doing now but also intentionally looking at like who we've been including in the process of what you might call examination of data or data analysis. And I know in my organization, like I said, we understand that in a theoretical sense, but how are we going to actualize it? And so this tool gave us that processing and that making sure we are being inclusive and fostering a better environment. And so what we were looking at was becoming an organization that really is a learning community. And as you know, the national office is supporting these, that learning community approach. You know, there's a lot of people when I was talking to them, and well, what is that? I mean, really, what is that? We found that in using a larger, diverse, deeper basis of people to dialogue with around the information, that it creates a different type of approach to many of the ways in which we were working together. This is just a conversation around emphasizing the fact that we started with data, that particular topic. We started with how do we do this learning community in the aspects of analyzing or interpretation of information so that we can get a better lens around whether people identify patterns and trends. And as we know, there are many people in our agencies that have just an acute mind for that type of work, and they are at all levels of the organization. And so we really saw that evident as well in trying to do this. So those different aspects and perspectives that come in the way of different staff at different levels of the organization and the community and clients was so critical. In the work, this wasn't just based upon like our experience, but in that work done by Oregon State and the work done by the Global Learning Partners in creating the curriculum, they went out to all 6 of these agencies that participated in the pilot, and they did some extensive interviews of case managers and housing council, DV advocates and child advocates, and went through a pretty extensive interviewing to come up with what is called in the research world personas. And those personas came out sort of in 3 different ways. And these are just, you know, Carol doesn't exist, but conceptually, Carol the case manager, and then also Megan the manager, Dina the director. What they found was, and I think the case manager persona was based upon almost 60 interviews throughout those 6 organizations. I think they talked to 16 or 17 managers and 13 directors. And what they asked them was, what is their relationship with information and what is their relationship with data? And what are your concerns and what do you consider to be the positive and the challenges around the collection of it? And what they did was they found that there were very specific things at each level within these 3 that while we know it, it proved it out over and over again in the conversation. And so as you might imagine, the case manager very specifically concerned about the client themselves, about the way the client is approached, the way the client is provided the service, and said statements like, you know, I used to be able to spend so much more time with my clients, and now I spend time doing administrative functions, of which data often was thought as an administrative part of the job. And also, you know, where does this data go? Some case managers felt that it was an up and out process, and that they weren't quite sure how the information they put into the system was used, or whether it was internally being looked at consistently in some type of way. And the manager, for instance, also said, you know, I pulled data from different various programs, and I wonder whether it's apples and apples. I wonder whether our compiling of information, takes away from it. I have my own needs for the types and the ways to be consistent. I also have reporting requirements to my director, and they sit sort of in that middle space around the information. And then in the director level, it was much more about, I know that we're doing great work. I know that we are doing a lot of things. I'm not sure how to communicate that effectively to some certain types of audiences, for instance, and that they wish they had better tools to be able to carry the message because they want to represent all the work being done by their staff. And so the learning community and the Futures projects focus was to ensure that all those perspectives and all of those concerns, which were very valid, were included in the dialogue and the conversation. And so how do you do that, you know? One thing around learning and creating a learning organization is that you try to make sure you're creating a safe environment where participants feel like, you know, what they express, their experience they come with, their deductive reasoning is respected and safe in that environment. And that you try to create a increased level of communication that way just naturally by the fact that you're bringing people all together versus the way in which sometimes we channel communication down and up and across our organization. And so a learning organization tries to work on improving that, but also making sure that everyone that you've brought in, even the clients themselves and the people who fund you, are involved in those communication lines. And then also to try to figure out how can I be supportive? If I'm somebody who wants to participate in this, how reasonably can I be supported? I have a workload, and I have a case demand, and I have places I have to be. So how is that going to be, how's the organization going to make it so that they value my time I spend doing this enough to ensure that I can do it? And then the other is that we have a better value of our diversity itself, that that is an asset. And that we also try to continue to foster what we come up with together, and that we try to make sure that we're improving that process all the time, learning how to learn together. One of the things that I found is interesting is that in our conversation, my organization trying to understand how do we create a learning community? How do we create that safety? How do we do that? It sounds great, but how do we change in order to do that? And we are a relatively large organization. We're $20 million plus. We have 25 or so programs across many of those dimensions of poverty that you saw. And we are in different locations, and we have various levels of management, although we try to be an anti-oppression organization, and in that meaning that we try to create that level of playing field internally and not be so hierarchical as most organizations begin. So we were trying to do and listen recently to community surveys, but also increasing our employee surveying of their satisfaction of working at Solid Ground. And we asked some management questions. And in those management questions, it was around, you know, do you trust management in the decision-making process? And we weren't scoring as high on that as we would like. And then what is your relationship? What's your perception of your relationship with staff and management? And is it strong? And do they support each other? Questions like that. And so one of the areas that we looked at and said, wow, if we want to be a learning community and actually really embrace this, we need to work on trust. We need to work on trust building. How do we do that? And I don't know whether we just are in a lucky time, but the work that Dr. Breanne Brown has been recently doing on the anatomy of trust, which is there's a web, let's see, it's not a TED Talk. It's a Oprah supercharged speaker. It's about 25-minute long video in which Breanne Brown gives the elements in her conversation around how she came to this through research around trust. And we have long had it thrown around in my agency from sort of manager level saying, I think this would be a good tool. And we have a new HR director and who has fully embraced that. And so for the first time we started to say, well, if we're going to try ourselves as leadership, the leadership team of my agency, to work on how we work together and promote this learning community approach, we're going to have to talk around the challenges and these issues and try to be more inclusionary in the way we approach addressing those employee survey responses. And so we took on the approach that we would adopt a framework around talking about trust in the organization, and that we would use this fundamental base that is in this work called BRAVING. It's an acronym. And then it talks about the elements of trust. You know, if you respect my boundaries, if you are reliable, if you're accountable. The vault is an interesting one. It talks about being able to keep confidences of information and talks sort of about that gossip work that happens sometimes within structures of organizations. Does management work with integrity and the way they approach things? Do we have non-judgment? If I make a mistake, do we go through the process together to have dialogue around it so that we can move forward together? And the generosity is that I come to you specifically saying that I will approach you with the best of intention, and the thought that you are approaching me with the best of intention, and we'll start with that framework. We've gone through some exercises together. We're starting to use this language together, and we're trying to communicate greater degree with all the levels of the organization on how we are working to improve our ability to be trusted as leadership, and that we're embracing that is necessary in order to truly live and create a learning community and a learning organization. The marble jar experience is interesting because in the video she identifies that a marble jar is the ways the marbles are kind of events. These on the left there I've got a quote that says, "Trust is found in the smallest of moments." And then we have marble jars on our desk and little bowls of marbles. And for an example, I have been trying to get I do technology in my agency, and I've been trying to get some of our directors to look at our cloud offers of software, because I really feel like they'll help them do their job as teams better. And one director came in and around the corner to me the other day and said, "Hey, I want you to know I listened to that. I see what you're saying. I want to try to do some more on it, but I don't have a lot of time." And I said, the fact that you just did it and that you trusted me enough to spend the time that you did on it is great. And I handed her a marble. And I believe that it's a physical representation, but it's something that we're working to do, and it's just one example. But we're trying to embrace that in order to try to set the right culture shifts within just the agency that I'm in. So I hope that helps. And the one thing I want to say is that in the Futures work around doing more, this higher level of collaboration around converting information data into decision-making is something that you have to have that leadership at the top. Gordon McHenry Jr. is my president of my agency, and he has been a supporter of this work and how critical that's been, and that means sometimes making sure that people have the time to go to those meetings, that they are allowed to give their input or be on a task force or do those things, and that he helps work that through their manager or the director. He himself, as you can see, has demonstrates buy-in, and that he's setting the tone for the way we are trying to change, and that he's in it. He's actually in the conversations. He's participating in the way presentations are happening and recommendations are being made around taking more client input or changing the way we survey, or we ask exit questions, or who we're including from the public into conversations, and encouraging our partners and other providers we refer people to come into the conversation. And it's very, it's sort of priceless if you can have that support, and it's made people successful. So I kind of want to go through, I've given a little bit of example, but I want to go through the, let me see, get my last slide here. Oops, too far. So I wanted to open it up and hear what people think, and if they have examples, I wanted to ask, do you have examples yourself around your organization and what it's doing in regards to working together to create environments where people are participating, and see what people think and if they have any questions at this time.
Thanks, Kim. So everyone that's on the line now, if you could just send in some examples or thoughts that you have to the question that Kim is posing right now, that would be great, and we'll read them out loud to everyone else that's here on the line with us. But we want you to participate, so please don't be shy. Use the chat and send in your responses. And while we're waiting for folks, I can offer my response to this from the perspective of the community. Of course, this is something that the learning community is all about, and it's built right into the frame of what we do. Building trust, especially when you can't always physically interact with the people that you're meeting with, is definitely a challenge when you're looking to work on some kind of collaborative or collective effort. And that's something that we really try to establish in the learning community. But one way that we have found to build trust from our perspective is to just be as transparent as possible when it comes to logistics, when it comes to expectations, when it comes to progress, and even when it comes to challenges, to just really kind of put there. We encourage them. All of our learning community groups, we try to make them, peer-to-peer based. So we really try to encourage participants in our groups to just be as open and transparent as possible. That really kind of helps everyone to know that, okay, we're all on the same page. I'm not the only person doing this. And when they hear about other people having trouble, they say, okay, I'm not the only person having this problem. So I'm not, banging my head against the wall for no reason. But we have found across, our different iterations of the learning community, that's probably the biggest advice that we can give in terms of trust. So. But if anyone else on the line has any responses, please send them in through the chat. We can't unmute you, so we can't hear you, but if anyone wants to participate in the chat, that would be great.
Well, one thing that I wanted to add is, and that is in the actual video, is how difficult it is to define, what trust means. And it's kind of like one of those big words, and usually loaded. Each of us come with a perspective of what is that, and that sometimes that's personal. It sounds personal, not professional, but that we're finding that as we try to create that level of respect in order to try to really make decisions, it's the clients themselves and the community we live in that it's important that we are together so that we're really approaching the work. And so we're finding that conversation, while it's taken people a little bit of time to, everyone sort of walked into it slowly, we now have some of the best active, engaged meetings that we've ever had. And so that's been a benefit.
So we got one response into the chat so far. Someone said the policy. Can I do that? Fine. Then listen. But they will come in. Or version.
I'm having a difficulty hearing what that was. Can you repeat that? I'm having difficulty hearing you, Hyacinth. Hello? I'm not sure if everyone can hear me still. Okay, so you can hear me. Hyacinth said to go ahead and go on. So what I would like to do, I have available the ability to see questions written. I'd like to be able to hear any of the examples that people have. I know that it might feel like a strange subject, but it's been a critical thing for us. I think what I'll do then, if you have any questions, I know what one of the things is that people can write in their question, and then we will go through the process of answering them. I see a hand raised. Oh, you know, that may be true. Someone posed that how do we create a safe environment for feedback or questions? And I think what can happen is those questions can be written in, and I know that we'll go through and answer any of those offline also when it comes to interacting, and I'd love to get those inputs because I think it really is about breaking this through and breaking it down in order to be able to talk about it. And so I respect that, and I hope that anyone who has a question will still continue to put it through, and I will try to answer those. So I think what I'll do is I'll just talk about how you can continue to be involved or be engaged in receiving more information or support around the Futures Project. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation. But, you know, joining and attending these types of learning community opportunities with the Poverty Trend national platform is great. Also, that if you could try to explore how the approaches of learning community work, or the way we were looking at information to ask questions differently from the perspective of outcomes in the communities you'd like to see versus the outputs that sometimes we're asked to ensure we provide back to funders. And also to share this information about Futures to your agency and to other people who may be interested in following up on it. That'd be great. And so I think the last thing I wanted to make sure is that part of the Futures work is to ensure that, you know, the efforts that we've made and the journey that we've been on is captured and is available for other people to look at and maybe use as an example or a tool, is that we are creating a toolkit of the types of information about the project, but also like content, the makeup or the composition, for instance, of the steering committee and the thought that went into that. The way in which the project's funded is available to look at, and we have a lessons learned section in which we're constantly going to be adding the recommendations that come out of the people going through the pilot on how to improve the pilot itself. And then also we have some tools like, I just saw one, I saw a question. Hyacinth, are you back?
Yes, I'm here. So please continue forward.
Okay. Are you receiving the questions?
So I'm getting comments to the question that you posed before. Would you like me to read those out? We did get quite a few in.
Okay, I'd love to answer any questions or hear them.
Okay. Well, these are responses to your question, like what people do to build trust.
Great.
So I can read those out. So some of the responses we got to that question that you posed earlier, where someone talked about they have an open door policy in their office. Someone else talked about how giving their clients attention when they come in to meet with them instead of, filling out their paperwork as they're talking to them really helps them to establish trust and changes the whole, level of their interaction. Another comment we got was that making your clients feel like they're not just someone else that's coming in, that is just coming in for help.
Those are all good. Great.
Let's see. Got any more in the chat? But I think that was the gist of what we got. So thank you to everyone that participated.
Yeah, I think that the statement that Gordon made around the word authentically going to the approach around trust building, that you come to it from a perspective of ensuring that people, I like the conversation, most of them were talking and centered around their relationship with clients. I think that is the core of the work, and that really, those are the examples of, if you want to go back to the analogy, those are those examples of the marbles in the marble jar. You're trying to make those small moments that you have with clients and interactions really count and identify that community action, because all staff represent community action. Not only that expression that you care, but that you're valuing them at a level that helps build that trust factor. So those are great examples. Thank you for participating. Did you have any other comments, Alison?
Nope, that was it.
All right. Well, thank you. I was going through the process of talking about the toolkit, which I'm very excited about. We're going to be having this as an ongoing development, and we consider being a learning, creating learning organizations and creating a tool that's going to hopefully continue to evolve to meet the needs as community action needs to move into the future, that we continue to support the development of this toolkit, and so that people have examples to look at, or at least ways in which it was done, that then you can start to talk in your own community. We understand and wanted this tool to be as flexible to each individual community and agency as possible, but also provide enough structure and sort of the steps to go through that you can use the tool flexibly. And so we'll continue to do that, and the personas in detail that were done in the research are there. The learning program itself will be there, and we'll add the case studies that are going to be done also. And so right now it's up on the Washington State Partnership website, and it is also going to be linked and on the national portal as well for the learning community. And so I just want to make sure that you can go for it and look there. And we'll add on the end. Any other questions or inputs overall, or questions about the future of Futures? I'll take, and I want to make sure everyone has my contact information. If you feel the need to follow up with me in any way after, or I can be a resource, let me know.
Great. Thank you for that, Kim. So we did have one question come in. Someone asked where they can find that video that you talked about of Dr. Brown and some more information on the marble jar. I think that's something that you could probably share with me, Kim, and I can include it in the follow-up email that goes out after today's event.
Absolutely, I can do that.
Sure. So we'll make sure that, oh, sure, sorry about that. So we'll make sure that everyone gets that. Another question that we had that came in, well, someone asked if they could follow up with you directly, Kim. So your phone and your email address is right here on the screen. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to Kim.
For sure. I'm here and more than welcome to share anything or support conversations about this.
Exactly. Very important work. So we're going to do a last call for any other questions that you might have for Kim. Send them in. Otherwise, we're going to go forward. If we don't get anything in, again, Kim is available by email. Please feel free to reach out to her. You can also reach out to me at my partnership email, and I can get you connected with Kim as well if you would be interested. But with that, we're going to move right along. Kim, thank you so much for today's presentation and leading us in this conversation.
All right. Well, and thank you very much. And the support and the work that you're doing at the national level is so great. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Of course. Thank you very much. And we're happy to talk about the really cool things that you guys are doing in your initiative. So really exciting to hear, and hopefully we'll have more to report out to the network soon. So thanks.
Bye.
All right, so just a couple of closing things from the partnership's perspective. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar event. We do want to highlight yet another webinar that we have for this week. I think this will make number 3 for this week, but this is the continuation of our Decreasing Family Homelessness series, where they're going to be talking a little bit more about how community action agencies have played a significant role in ending homelessness in their state. So that is actually going to be taking place tomorrow, and that will be at 2 p.m. Eastern. And you can find the registration link for this event on our website. We really do appreciate your feedback. We really do try to take it to heart, and we use that to develop our future webinar presentation topics and also to refine the ones that we have previously scheduled. So we would very much appreciate if you could take just a few moments to fill out the survey. You can copy the link on your screen, open that up in your browser. It's about 5 questions, really quick. We would really appreciate it, and it does have a big impact on the quality of the webinar presentations that we offer out to the network. So thank you for that. And finally, here is the contact information for everyone through the learning community staff. Please feel free to reach out to any or all of us with your questions, concerns, comments. We would be happy to help you out. But with that, that will conclude today's webinar presentation. Thank you all so much. Again, thank you to Kim for presenting today, and that will conclude today's webinar. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.